Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. We've just come out of the panto season. Now, I absolutely love panto. I love the familiarity of it. I love the silliness. I love the fun. I love the way that the actors have permission to lose it in fits of giggles on the stage. Also, as well, I especially love the innuendos in the British humour. I've often wondered what people who aren't from the UK make of panto, because when you think about it, it's so incredibly British. I once asked the dad of one of my children's friends who is from the Ukraine if he'd ever been to panto, and he said that in the first year that their family were in the UK, they went to panto at the Palladium. Quick aside, if you've never been, please, if you can go, it's just brilliant. And they'd gone as a family, and first time in the UK, they had absolutely no idea what was going on. Then they went the year after they'd had a year of living in the UK, and they did actually get it. Anyway, I digress. We're not actually talking about panto today. The reason I'm mentioning panto is because of the fairy tale aspect of it. So when the panto ends and Snow White and Prince Charming, or whichever characters are featured, they disappear off into fairyland to live happily ever after, and the audience feels satisfied that good has triumphed over evil, and off we go to fight our way through the Christmas halls. For me, it's to my smugly booked table at Pizza Express. You won't catch me making that mistake again. Oh no, I book in October. So what happens for us once we think we have our fairy tale ending? We often refer to points in our lives using fairy tale language. So we've got the dream job, we've got the dream holiday, we've got the fairy tale wedding. And we can be so focused on a point in time that we can never see past that. I find that with Christmas as well. Sometimes I just can't see past Christmas. And it can be quite a shock to find that we do actually have to go back to work after Christmas, or we do have to come home from our holidays. Sometimes we will build up pictures in our minds about how our lives will be after a particular event. So everything will be okay when, or I'll be happy when, ... And we know that's just a fallacy. What can happen after the fairy tale ends is that there may be a multitude of feelings, and some we might like more than others. We might feel relief that things have gone the way that we wanted them to. We might feel exhausted after all the effort that we've put in, and we might feel pleased with what we've achieved or the result that we've got. Yet, we don't often talk about any negative feelings that might come up. Do Cinderella and Prince Charming live happily ever after? Or is she swapping notes with all the other princesses about how disappointed she is, whilst the princes are off on yet another trip to the local taverns? So what might be going on for us, psychodynamically, once the fairy tale has come to its conclusion? One of the main things that might get in our way is anxiety. And this can show itself in many forms and can come as quite a shock. We get what we think we've wanted. So why do we feel like this? It can be expected to feel anxious on the lead up to something. So why is it still here now we've got what we wanted? Strangely enough, there's maybe some guilt that pops up for us once we've achieved our fairy tale ending. There are some pretty awful things that are going on in the world, and we can feel, well, why should we get what we want when there are so many other people out there who are having absolutely terrible times? Maybe there's a lot of people who've worked hard to help us achieve our fairy tale ending. And have we thanked them enough? How do they feel about our fairy tale ending? Is there some comparison going on? And guilt can often be a stepping stone to other feelings and behaviours, particularly defensive ones. We don't like to feel guilty. It can be one of the things that makes us feel anxious, and we are going to try and avoid this at all costs. So out pop our defence mechanisms of choice. Denial, rationalisation, repression, intellectualisation, you name it, we're going to be bringing it out. Defensive behaviour then can get in the way of our relationships. It can be a bit like a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm behaving defensively as I'm anxious that I'm going to get hurt, so I need to protect myself. But when we behave defensively, instead of people understanding our behaviour, they can be alienated from us further because they don't know what's going on in our heads. I can argue that day is night if I really want to. Sometimes the stories and narratives that I make up for myself, I absolutely should be on the Booker Prize list. I think I could win with some of the stories that I've created. But nobody else sees that because it's all going on in my head, and I don't tell people what's going on in my head because I assume that I'm an open book. But that's not necessarily the case. And one of the biggest problems that we face in communicating with other people is that we think they know what we're thinking. And yet realistically, that often couldn't be further from the truth. This can then lead into another thread for our anxiety to take up. And believe me, it doesn't need a lot of persuading to do this. This is the anxiety that we can lose what we've worked so hard to get. And you know the feeling, if we're desperately trying to hold on to something, then the chances are we're going to lose it. We become hyper aware of any threats or potential challenges, so we become fixated and obsessed with hanging on to something at all costs. You can almost feel us grabbing on with our fingernails. And that means then there's the potential for us to change from the confident, assured person who's achieved their goal to an anxious, insecure person who perceives a threat round every corner. This can then lead us to question whether we really wanted something in the first place, because we're feeling something that we didn't think we'd be feeling. There's also the flip side to this, that we can become a bit blasé now that we've got what we wanted and we don't put any effort into keeping it. And if you look at both sides of this coin, neither of them feel particularly joyful. On a more existential level, we can now start to question our own identity. Does Cinderella take Prince Charming's surname? Is she now known as Mrs. Cinderella Charming? So who are you now that you've achieved what you wanted? Do you know and do you like who you are now? There can also be a feeling of loss that accompanies reaching the goal, because you're no longer working on the project to get you where you wanted to be. And is it everything you wanted it to be? Sometimes we feel disappointment in that we've built something up in our heads to be absolutely incredible, and it just turns out to be a bit meh. And it's why they always say don't meet your heroes in case they disappoint. Although when I met Roger Moore at a book signing, he definitely didn't disappoint. For the brief moment that he spoke to me, he made me feel like I was the only person in the world. It was absolutely incredible. As humans, we can also be a bit contrary too. After we get what we want, we don't want it. There's a fabulous poem by Dorothy Parker called On Being a Woman, and in the second part she says, "And why with you, my love, my lord, am I spectacularly bored? Yet you do up and leave me, then I scream to have you back again." I think this sums it up perfectly. When we have what we want, it loses its shine. Take it away from us, though, and we desperately want it back. My invitation to you this week is to consider where in your life you might have had your fairy tale ending or endings and then been surprised by how you felt afterwards. Were you disappointed, or maybe you felt anxious? Knowing what we know now, how do you think you might feel when you have your next fairy tale ending? And, as always, give yourself some grace. It's really common to have squished away all those difficult feelings and not looked at them, thinking that you shouldn't be having them. But remember, we're humans, we're not robots. Looking at ourselves at this level can be challenging and unnerving as we develop our awareness, so I'd always encourage that you do this at your own speed. If you feel you need some extra help around this, then I've put together a PDF resource sheet, and you can find the link for this in the show notes. If you'd like to have a chat with me about psychodynamics, or whether I'm the right coach, supervisor or mentor for you, then click on the link that's also in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Please hit the follow button for future episodes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at The Dynamics of Everyday Life, or find me on LinkedIn at Julia Rogers. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on dynamics. The Dynamics of Everyday Life is brought to you by Coaching 42 and the fabulous team at the Podcast Boutique.